Good day to everyone joining us, and welcome to today's X Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled Born on eCOA, the New Standards of Deployment. My name is Nima, and I'll be your X Talks host for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 30 minutes with plenty of time for Q&A. This presentation includes a Q&A session with both of our speakers. This webinar is designed to be interactive, and webinars work best when you're involved. So please feel free to submit questions and comments for our speakers throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. This chat box is located in the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. If you require any assistance, please contact me at any time by sending a message using this chat panel. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode. Please note that this event will be recorded and made available for future download. At this point, I'd like to thank YPrime, who helped develop the content for this presentation. YPrime offers more than a decade of focused work with eClinical systems to expedite and improve the quality of patient management, clinical supplies, drug accountability, and clinical data. Electronic clinical outcome assessment platforms offer sponsors greater speed, precision, integration into the clinical trial management field. Now I'd like to introduce our speakers for today's event. Catherine Acquadro, MD, is the head of thought leadership at Mapi. A recognized COA expert, she has been working in the field of outcomes research for more than 25 years, with a focus on cross-cultural research. Catherine launched Mapi's linguistic validation activities in the early 1990s, with her involvement in the International Quality of Life Assessment Project and the development of the LV methodology. Career highlights include serving as a coordinator of the European Regulatory Issues on Quality of Life Assessment Project for the recognition of patient-reported outcomes in the evaluation of medicinal products, and as the coordinator of the PRO Harmonization Group in collaboration with the FDA. Donna Mongiello is Vice President of Strategic Solutions for YPrime, bringing 20 years of business development and operational leadership in eClinical and digital health solutions. She is a recognized expert in patient recruitment, retention, and electronic clinical outcome assessment topics. Donna's nursing background and industry career supporting sponsors have instilled a strong desire to improve clinical research from the patient's perspective, simplify study conduct, and make study participation less burdensome for patients. And now, without further ado, I'd like to hand the presentation over to our very first speaker. Catherine, you may begin your presentation when you are ready.
Yes, of course. Okay, so I hope you see my screen, and I thank you all, and I thank you, Nima, for the introduction, and I welcome everybody to this webinar. So the presentation of today will be split in two parts. I will present some basic information about migration of clinical outcome assessments, or COAs, from paper to electronic format, starting from some definitions, then describing the levels of evidence required to support the comparability of measurement equivalence of eCOAs to the paper-based COA measure from which they were derived. Then I will share some examples of pitfalls experienced during this process. Donna will introduce the YPrime cloud-based app, or it can be used to migrate measures or to create measures directly on an electronic format, hence the Born eCOA title of our webinar. So I think that we start with a polling question.
Okay, everyone, it's time for a polling question. So it will be launched on your screen. And our question here is, do you have experience with migrating paper instruments into an electronic platform? So now I invite all audience members to please vote on this poll question in real time, and we'll take a look at the results. So we have two options here, yes and no. So it looks like most of the audience members have voted. So let's take a look at the results. All right, such interesting results. 69% of the audience members have selected A, yes. 31% of the audience members have selected no. Now back to you, Catherine.
Okay, thank you. So what I see here is that some of you have already gone through this migration process. And for those who did not, my presentation will provide some basics, which I hope will be very helpful. Okay, so yeah, okay. So there are two main categories of electronic administration: voice devices and screen text devices. So today we are going only to mainly focus our talk on migration on screen visual text devices. They provide the respondent with a computerized version of the measures, items, and responses in a visual text format. Screen text devices include desktop and laptop computers, which may include a touch screen, tablet or touchscreen notebook computers, and palm computers and web-based system. When we speak about migration from paper to an electronic format, we often use the word faithful. A faithful migration is the implementation of the paper clinical outcome assessment on alternative modes of data collections that do not bias responses. And this is really very important. The migration must ensure that there are no change in content and that patients will interpret and respond the same way regardless of the mode. This is clearly stated in the eSport task force paper by Sonia Eremenko and al., published in 2014 in Value in Earth. So do we have some guidance on this? And I can say that now we have quite a lot of guidance on how to proceed, either from the ePro Consortium, from the Critical Path Institute, or from the eSport ePro Task Force, where you have most of their recommendations were published in Value in Earth, or by academic organizations like the ORTC or the Eurocor Group, or vendors or companies like us, Mapi or Icon now, who did a lot of publications about migration and provided best practices. As for the FDA, the FDA does not provide methodological guidance, but states clearly that she will review evidence of measurement comparability. And here, this is very important because I'm going to talk about the levels of evidence between paper and electronic versions. So in 2009, the eSport ePro Task Force published some recommendations on the evidence needed to support measurement equivalence during the migration. Kunz et al. Categorized the magnitude of the modification into 3 levels by which the scales, the potential effect on the content, meaning or interpretation of the measures, items, and or scales is assessed. If a paper and pencil questionnaire is simply placed into text screen format without significantly altering item content, recall period, or response options, this is considered a minor modification. Minor levels of modifications also include going from multiple items per page to 1 item per screen, for example, on an handheld device. The level of evidence required to show equivalence for a minor modification is mainly, I would say, qualitative, so using cognitive interviewing with patients and usability testing. When modification is considered to be moderate, Kunz et al. Suggest that the modification may result in changes to the perceived meaning of the assessment items. Example of moderate changes, and here I'm going on mainly focus on screen text devices, include splitting an item into multiple screens, for instance, having a question and its responses on different screens, using a scroll bar to view all item text or responses, which is not recommended, but sometimes you have to do it, and changing the order of item presentation. Where such modifications are made, the level of evidence required would involve conducting quantitative equivalent testing, which evaluates the comparability between COA scores from the electronic mode of administration and the original mode. The intent is to ensure scores do not vary significantly between modes, barring measurement errors, because here, this is very important, we are focused on measurement. Usability testing is also recommended to ensure that prospective participants experience no issues with the usability of the device. Substantial modifications occur when significant changes are made to the original assessment, such as changes to the wording or response options, and Kunz et al. Suggests that this can fundamentally change the properties of the original instrument, and that the migrated instrument should be treated as a brand new measure requiring full psychometry testing. So I've spent a little bit some time on this because this is very important. We will see with Donna later that some levels of evidence might, the levels didn't change, but the importance of the studies that we have to use for that, we can be a little bit more relaxed on that, but Donna will talk about it later. Here is a figure presenting the major step of migration, which is the implementation of the measure on the device. Of course, this is what we mean. To make sure that we are doing the right thing, the e-provider creates screenshots based on the paper measure. Those are reviewed and validated before we are using the device. Of course, then what you see on the right side of the slides is the illustrations of all the equivalent tests that we are doing, whether they are qualitative or quantitative. I think that now we are going to have a polling question.
All right, everyone. So the second poll question we have for you is on your screen. And the question here is, for those of you with experience, which of the following issues have you experienced? So we have 5 options here. Data entry errors during screenshot development is our first option. Next option is difficulties with cognitive interviews. Our third option here is difficulties with usability testing. Our fourth option is difficulties during equivalence studies. And our last option here is all of the above. So again, I encourage all the audience members to please vote on this poll question, and we'll take a look at the results. All right, perfect. So it looks like most of the audience members have voted. Let's take a look at the results. All right, so 27% of the audience members have selected the first option, data entry errors during screenshot development. 13% of the audience members have selected the third option, which is difficulties with usability testing. 20% of the audience have selected difficulties during equivalent studies, and most audience members have selected all of the above. Now back to you, Catherine.
Thank you. So I think that this is very interesting because, in fact, I will show you our next slide. We are experiencing the same thing, that most of the time we have problems during the screenshot creation and validation. So it goes close to the 27% that you during the polling question. So this year, what we did, we did a review of most of our migration studies at Mapi, and we realized that we had faced unexpected issues during the screenshot developments and validation. And I will like to share with you the common mistakes or problems that we have encountered. So during the quality control and the review of the screenshots, we have encountered 3 types of problems, and this applies to the migration of the original version and the translations as well. And I have called them, because I'm a big fan of the movie, but it's the wrong, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So I've called them the wrong, the missing, and the truncated, because we did not expect that to see that we would find during the quality control some wrong spelling or wrong words that were used in instructions, item, or response choices. We were not expecting to see also that some instructions were missing, or some words, or some response choices, and also for some languages like Chinese or Japanese, we had the truncated categories because some characters were missing. So in an ideal world, those mistakes should be avoided, because this should not happen. And I think that's most of the time this happens because the migration is done by people who are not familiar with the measure, and so this can happen, and if they are not seen through quality control, then major problems can occur during the study using the devices. And there are, our problem here is that those mistakes are to be faced again and again in e-provider after e-provider, because we are doing always new screenshots when we change providers and migration after migration. So I'm going to show you an example here, which is taken from the wrong category. So this is a fake example that I have built for this webinar, but it perfectly illustrates some of the issues that we have seen during our reviews of screenshots. Here you see on the left that the 6 response option of the intensity scale is wrong. A small amount has been repeated twice during the migration, and the correct response option, a tiny amount, has disappeared. In the second example, the 5th response category is also wrong. Little of the time has been replaced by a sum of the time. And you can imagine that this kind of mistake in a migration process for which equivalence of measurement is crucial can be extremely problematic, because the patient is not going to know which one to choose. And if he thinks more of a tiny amount and puts small amount, then you have a wrong answer. And if this is not seen during the quality control, then the item linked to this response category has to be considered missing and impairing the results of the study. So this is something that we don't want. And so as I said before, the main issue is the repetition of screenshot development that could lead to the repetition of errors. So do we have a solution? And we have explored the field at Mapi and found that cloud-based platforms could help us in avoiding the issues that I've raised previously. We are currently building a business model for migrating the measures that we are distributing at Mapi Research Trust, and for developing a licensing solutions. The migration could be done in-house by experienced people. And now this is an option that we are currently considering and discussing internally. The person in charge of this program will be Caroline Onfray, who is the head of the author collaboration unit at Mapi Research Trust. And I have put here contact details, because if you need to reach her directly for any questions that I won't be able to answer today, then go ahead and feel free to reach her. Because as I said before, we are at the very, very beginning of our program, and not all the issues have been resolved. So this is why we are in contact with Donna and YPrime. And now I will let Donna present the YPrime solution. In other words, the cloud-based YPrime app. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Catherine. Thanks for level setting with all of us. It was really interesting, everything you presented, and putting into perspective some of those quality challenges I think that we've all faced. 40% of us anyway have seen some level of that in the migration of a paper scale to an electronic platform. So I guess before we get started, I'd just like to say that Mapi and YPrime see this born on eCOA as an evolving reality. But in the meantime, there's a lot of paper validated instruments out there, and we must do quite a bit of paper to electronic migrations. So for the next 10 to 15 minutes, I'm going to talk a little bit about using a cloud-based solution for paper to electronic migrations, and also the benefits of just giving birth, so to speak, to brand new instruments within a cloud-based platform. So moving towards this born on eCOA concept. So in addition to the quality challenges I think Catherine just described, sponsors and vendors alike tend to have to manage very tight timelines with the current process of migrating validated instruments to an electronic platform. It seems like it's the norm to complete paper to electronic migrations just before first patient in, and this puts stress on all of us, really. We think it's time for a change. Mapi agrees, and they've chosen YPrime's solution for this change, mostly because of our modern cloud-based platform. So to clarify, the YPrime platform is a cloud-based app, and it allows for developing eCOA solutions in all modalities, so a single app for every use case. And that would include provisioned handhelds, otherwise known as smartphones, in addition to bring your own device or BYOD solutions, and tablets and the web. The platform's 100% configurable, which means there's no need for a software developer to write code or program the instrument into the system. This is why we can have partners like Mapi using the Study Builder tool to migrate paper instruments or create new instruments directly in the cloud. Being a configurable system also means the platform stays in a perpetually validated state, so we don't have to revalidate the platform with every new build, and that allows for improved quality, and it saves time during setup for new studies. Once an instrument is created in the platform, it's going to be stored in a library, and Mapi's instrument library within YPrime's platform will house all of their electronic implementations, including all the translations. Having a library like this allows for a really quick startup, since screen reports for EC or IRB submissions are available immediately. And then in addition to saving a significant amount of time at startup, a cloud-based instrument library saves cost and equally importantly, reduces risk because of the ability to lock the version into the library within the validated platform. So I think we've got a polling question.
All right, everyone. So our third poll question is up on your screen right now. The poll question is, for those of you with experience in electronic migration, what is a typical timeline for the migration process? Now we have three options here: 30 days, 60 days, and over 90 days. Again, I encourage all audience members to please vote on this poll question and we'll share the results. All right, so it looks like most of the audience members have voted. Let's take a look at the results. All right, so 26% of the audience members have selected 30 days. 35% of the audience members have selected 60 days, and 39% of the audience members have selected over 90 days. Such interesting results. Now back to you, Donna.
Thanks. So let's talk a little bit about building instruments. We're going to get to the polling results in a couple of slides. I think for some reason that polling slide got a little out of order in the presentation, and I apologize for that. It's going to be more applicable in a couple of slides when I'm going to show a timeline of what is typical. And I'll just say that I'm a little bit surprised by the results that we had, but we'll kind of address that in a couple of minutes. In the meantime, I do want to talk a little bit more about the platform. So since it's fully configurable, no special skills are actually needed in order to create new instruments. Right now, Mapi's team's being trained on how to use the Study Builder tool within the platform, and they'll systematically migrate their current paper library, which is about 300 or so instruments, into the solution, along with all scoring algorithms that are required for those instruments. So here you can see the simplicity of the Study Builder. This is a commonly used instrument in oncology studies, the EORTC QOQ C30. And what you see here are the first 5 questions within that instrument, along with their response options: not at all, a little bit, quite a bit, and very much. These questions are built out really simply, and the additional questions that make up the full instrument are built out in the same way. So we see the response options are the first item in the sequence, followed by the first 5 questions in the instrument. And here we have the original paper version on the left. And it does seem to me to be a bit complicated when you compare it to the electronic implementation, which are in the middle and on the right. There's a lot of text on the paper version. It's not super clean, but it's what a typical paper implementation actually looks like. We know it's validated and it delivers high quality data from the patients that complete it. But when we compare the electronic to the paper, I think you can see why in migration study after migration study, evidence shows that electronic implementations have equal or better measurement properties than their paper predecessors. The paper just seems complicated, where the tablet seems cleaner and clear for the patient to complete. Here's a second example of the simplicity of the Study Builder to create a questionnaire, and this one is the WOMAC. You can see on the left in the Study Builder the instruction text along with a couple of questions regarding patients' experience with pain. And then on the right, you can see the implementation of these questions in the patient's view on the tablet device. Really, again, simple to create, clean and easy for the patient to complete. Sorry, wrong direction. Okay, EQ5D. So probably a lot, if not everybody on this webinar has seen the paper and electronic versions of the EQ5D. This particular question in the instrument has a unique feature. It has a vertical visual analog scale, or VAS, with hash marks, but not typical at all of a VAS. The paper version is complicated for the patient. They must write an X on the VAS to indicate how their health is. Then they write the number in the little box that corresponds to where they placed the X along the scale. That is even complicated for me to describe to you. So imagine the patient's experience in having to do this. With the electronic implementation, it's very simple. The patient taps the vertical VAS, the corresponding number appears in the box. So it's easy to see that even some unique challenge like a vertical VAS, as required by the EQ5D, can be delivered accurately in a tablet solution, look clean and clear and simpler for the patient to use than the original paper version. So here's where the polling question would have come in. So if we look back at your results from that polling question, we had 26% feeling that the process or timeline for an electronic, paper to electronic migration would be 30 days. We had 35% who felt that it was about 60 days and about 39% greater than 90 days. So the largest percent was definitely at the greater than 90 days, but it was almost an even split, which I do find to be interesting because in my experience, the typical timeline for this is usually in that 90 days or more. And frankly, I've seen it to be significantly more. And I think the determination of that timeline has to do with a lot of different things. Catherine discussed some of the pitfalls that are experienced in the process of migrating a validated scale, but in addition to those challenges around quality, there are other things that kind of feature into this, and I think it's timeline, so typically greater than 3 months, and definitely cost. I think honestly there has to be quite a bit of planning if you want to use a validated paper instrument in an electronic format in your study and it's not already available to you. So these are issues that hopefully Born on eCOA, as it becomes more the mainstream, will eliminate. But one thing that we actually haven't talked about yet is what does it actually take to develop a brand new instrument from scratch? So whether you're developing the new instrument old school, starting with paper, or new school, Born on eCOA, the timeline and costs are about the same. It can take, I've seen, a year or even more, sometimes up to 2 years, to develop a brand new instrument from scratch. And I think most of us would realize that that is a little bit dependent upon the patient population, the level of research that's required in that population. In addition to that timeline, there's a huge cost, a big price tag for that. So Born on eCOA versus Born on paper, there really aren't any savings in time or cost. So why would you do it? What do you actually gain with Born on eCOA? Well, what you gain with Born on eCOA is the ability to not have to do that electronic migration, which you would eventually need if you developed this instrument in a paper environment. So you'll have better readiness when you use an instrument that's Born on eCOA because you don't have to go through that 3+ months of timeline and tens of thousands, you know, $80,000, $100,000 in that compressed short startup period before first patient in, and have to go through that entire process. You'll be ready to go right away. So I guess what we see as adding significant value to cloud-based eCOA, and this applies whether you're doing an electronic migration process or whether you're giving birth to a brand new instrument within the platform, are real clear benefits in savings of time and cost. So saving that 90+ days to do the migration, saving that $80,000, $90,000, $100,000 or more, depending on the instrument, the patient population, in order to complete the migration. With Born on eCOA, we just don't have to deal with any of that stuff. No, none of those issues, not the additional time, not the additional cost. We're ready to go right up front. When we need to use the instrument in a new study, there's no level of planning for migration. It's just kind of there out of the box. So I think it eliminates a lot of stress for not only study teams, but most definitely vendors as well. Additionally, keeping a migrated or Born on eCOA instrument on a perpetually validated platform and in a locked version mitigates any risks around quality. So a lot of that stuff that Catherine talked about in her presentation, you just don't have those in a perpetually validated cloud-based platform. It just also allows you, this cloud-based platform allows you to eliminate any concerns about devices going end of life. So that's another thing that we deal with. Catherine sort of alluded to this, is if we've done that electronic migration within a vendor platform on a specific device and that device goes end of life, or you want to use that instrument with a different vendor, unfortunately, the climate right now is got to do it all over again. When you're dealing with a cloud-based solution, a cloud-based app, once it's done, it will look exactly the same, whatever the device is. So independent of the device, you can use that instrument over and over and over and over and over again. So eCOA utopia. What is the future of eCOA? What is the future of potentially Born on eCOA? I think one potential future could be that instrument authors and regulatory agencies agree that once we have an electronic migration completed, independent of the device or the platform, that within certain tolerances for screen size and resolution of the device, whether it's a handheld, whether it's a tablet or the web, within that same patient population, there would be no variability in the validity of the instrument, whether it was implemented on a different device or on a different eCOA platform. So no further requirement to continue to gather additional evidence just because the device has changed or the eCOA platform has changed. Once it's been done in a specific patient population, it's good to go. That would be a good future. It would save time, it would save money, it would save frustration. But what about an even better future than that? We've certainly seen a growing body of evidence that across hundreds of instruments, maybe even thousands of instruments that have been migrated from paper to electronic, across all patient populations, ages, across all device types, independent of size, whether old school PDAs even, smartphones, tablets, the web, that the measurement properties of an electronic implementation are at a minimum equal to, but more frequently better than, the original paper version. So at what point in time can we say, as long as we adhere to best practices in the process of our migration, additional validation evidence is simply no longer required? Well, there have actually been several papers published on this since 2008. A couple of them you're seeing right here. The most recent was just published in 2017 by Muehlhausen et al., stating that we've got enough accumulated evidence that we no longer need to go through this per instrument, per study, per device, per platform process of migration anymore. I think this would be a really exciting future for eCOA, and I think it's one we can get to, but it requires a few brave organizations to commit to the path, whether through advanced discussions with regulatory agencies or by submitting past evidence of migration with a current study submission. So I've got a shameless plug here. We'll talk more about this in a few weeks on December 13th and 14th in Philadelphia at the eCOA and ePro 2017 conference. And I hope you'll join us in the discussion and share your ideas for the future of eCOA. That's it for me. I'd like to thank you for joining us today and turn it back to Nima for Q&A.
All right, everyone. So now it is time for the Q&A portion of this webinar. So I invite the audience members to send in their questions through the questions panel. I've already received a few questions, so we'll begin with those. Now, our first question here is, how will Mapi prioritize the migration of its library, and how many instruments will be migrated?
I think this one is for me. So we have about 300 instruments in our library, and the instrument that we are officially distributing. And we are still working out the priority order for migration, and we hope that we will have this figured out in Q1 of 2018. But in the meantime, we'll be migrating instruments, I would say, based on sponsor need first, because this is obvious. You know, the one that are needed the most will be migrated the first. And here it's my answer.
All right, thank you so much for that answer. Our second question here is, how will Mapi handle instrument licenses for the ones they have already migrated?
This one is a very good question, and I'm afraid that I won't be able to answer to this one right away, because we are still working on this, still working this out, and we should have a better idea for this in early 2018. And as I said before during my presentation, we are working on this with Caroline Onfray, with at the head of the author unit collaboration at Mapi, because we have to involve the authors, the developers of the original questionnaires, and all this licensing stuff is quite, I would say, complicated, and we really have to work on it. And I hope to be able to give more answers next year, and maybe do another webinar on that, so I can say, you know, what we are planning for the licenses.
All right, thank you so much for that answer. We have another question here from the audience. The question here is, if an instrument is developed electronically versus on paper first, how much time is saved?
I guess I can take that one. Thank you for the question. Well, actually, the process for development of the instrument, whether on paper or electronic, doesn't really save us any time. We wouldn't expect a cost or really time savings with the development of a brand new instrument. But where we're going to see some benefit is in the fact that that paper instrument will eventually require migration to an electronic platform, and that process itself is time consuming, 3 months or more, and can cost, you know, in the neighborhood of 80 or more than $100,000. So when we develop electronically in the first place, we don't have to manage that. So not really going to be saving much time in the direct to electronic development, but we will save it on the back end when we don't then have to do the migration.
All right, thank you so much for that answer. Our next question here is, how is the instrument author involved in a paper to electronic migration?
I think this one is for me. So actually, it really depends on the author, because in some cases they really want to be involved in the process, and so they follow every step very closely, and some others are not really interested at all in being involved. So either way, we accommodate the author's requirements, and they are always in contact with us, because when we receive a request for migration, you know, we have to because this is an electronic version is considered as a derivative product, you know, from the original questionnaire. So the author is always involved, and we always ask them. And as I said before, it really depends on if they want to go through all the process, look at the results of the equivalent studies, or the quantitative equivalent studies, or look at the results of the UT. So some of them are really following that very closely, and some others not. So we deal with their will all the time.
All right, thank you for that answer. Our next question here is, are there any special issues that arise from direct development on an electronic platform that you don't see on paper?
I can take that one, Catherine. Well, I'll start. How about that? I'll start, and then if you've got anything to add, that would be good.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's any specific issues in an electronic development that are special to that process. The paper development process and the electronic development process are really, really similar. There might be special needs that paper has that are different than electronic needs, but there's not anything special really that electronic has that would complicate it or make it any more difficult to do than a paper development. What do you think, Catherine? Anything?
No, for the development, no. I think that maybe we can have a usability testing to see how the patient, play with the device, but that's the only thing I can see, because it really depends. And I see that more and more people, are used with are using tablets, using smartphones, and so they are very I would say used to the electronic world now, and it's not like, I would say several years before where some people were lost, but not anymore. So besides maybe having a UT, I don't see anything different from the paper.
All right, thank you so much for those answers. We have another question here for Donna. Can you share the articles you mentioned in your last slide?
Yes, of course. Anyone interested in those articles, please just send me an email and I can provide those. Absolutely.
All right, and the emails for Donna and Catherine will be displayed after the Q&A for everyone. So our next question here is, would this build integrate into an EMR system like Epic? And do you handle copyright when the copyright owner requires a fee to use the tool?
I think the copyright thing is for me. Yes, we do handle copyright, and we because as I said before, the electronic version is a derivative product, like the translation. When the paper has been developed on paper, then the electronic mode is something different. So yes, we deal with that, and we always consult with the author. And I can speak about the translations. For instance, when we deliver translations, we have a minimal fee for the delivering the translations, and also it really depends on the authors if they want to have fees also per studies, per patient. So it really depends on the specificities of the questionnaire and the author. For the can you remind me the other question? I think it's maybe more for Donna, the first part of the question. So
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so the first part of the question was, would this build integrate into an EMR system like Epic?
Oh yeah, that would be more for me.
Yeah.
Definitely, that would be more for me. Yeah, absolutely. We can integrate with EMRs, so we can absolutely integrate with EMRs like Epic.
All right, perfect. So our next question here is, how does being cloud-based ensure a perpetual validated state?
Well, being cloud-based doesn't. Being configurable does. So we don't have developers who go in for each new diary creation and create through software development, through coding and programming. It's basically a configurable solution that allows for basic entry into pre-formatted solutions. So because we don't have software developers in the base is validated. All we do is configure from that. That's why it's perpetually validated.
Yeah, and I would say that means that when we have to do some changes on some versions, for instance, changing some something that may look very trivial, it's the copyright mention. Sometimes we have to change it, and so we would do it directly, and so when we have to update the versions, we would be able to do it directly and without having all the time to review the screenshots and everything. So that's that.
Yeah. Yeah, and once a questionnaire is fully developed, once Mapi has a questionnaire fully developed and migrated into the platform, it's locked. So it can't be altered without an audit trail being available. So that's also kind of part of the value in terms of the quality stuff that Catherine mentioned before.
All right, well, thank you very much for those answers. We've reached the end of the Q&A portion of this webinar. And if your question wasn't attended to during the Q&A session, the team from YPrime will do their best to follow up with you after the webinar. Thank you everyone for participating in today's conference. You will be receiving a follow-up email from XTalks with access to the recorded archive for this event. A survey window will be popping up on your screen, and your participation is appreciated as it will help us to improve our webinars. Now please join us in thanking our speakers, Catherine Acquadro and Donna Mongiello. And we hope you found this conference informative. Have a great day, everyone.